There was a man who came to me many years ago, sitting in the dim light of my study in Kusnacht, and he insisted with great force that he was not in love. He repeated this with the conviction of a man defending a fortress. And yet every other sentence he spoke about her began with the same small, almost invisible word, asterisk. She said, she thinks, she would never. He did not notice it. He could not notice it. For the unconscious had already arranged his sentences before his ego had time to censor them. And I sat there, listening, knowing what he did not yet know, that the moment a man begins to quote a woman without being asked, something has already happened in the depths of him that no rational denial could undo. He was in the most precise psychological sense already in love, and he was the last person in the room to realize it. I want to speak tonight about the strange and almost sacred moment when a man's language begins to betray him. Not in the sense of treachery, but in the original sense of the word, asterisk betrayal, asterisk as revelation, as the showing of what was meant to remain hidden. The Latin root asterisk, tradere asterisk, means to hand over, to deliver. And this is precisely what language does to a man when love has begun its quiet work in him. It delivers him. It hands him over to the very truth he has been trying to outrun. He believes he is in control of his words, but his words have already been colonized by a presence other than his own. He has begun to speak in two voices. Most men believe that love announces itself with thunder. They expect a great storm of feeling, a moment of recognition so violent that no doubt could survive it. They are waiting, in other words, for the conscious mind to deliver a verdict. But love, in my experience as a physician of the soul, almost never enters through the front door of consciousness. It enters through the back. It slips in through dreams, through small obsessions, through the way a man's eyes drift to the door whenever it opens. And most of all, it enters through speech, through the words that escape him before he has time to dress them in reason. The phrase I have placed at the center of tonight's reflection, asterisk, when a man says this, he is already in love, asterisk, is not a single phrase. It is a category of phrases. It is a constellation of small linguistic events, each one harmless on its surface, each one devastating in its depths. And I want to walk with you through them, one by one, as a guide walks a traveler through an old and dimly lit cathedral, pointing to the frescoes on the walls, frescoes the traveler had walked past 1,000 times and never seen. The first of these phrases is the one I have already mentioned, asterisk, she said. Asterisk, when a man begins to quote a woman in conversations that have nothing to do with her, when her sentences begin to surface in his speech, the way certain melodies surface in a man's whistling without his permission, something has shifted in his inner architecture. He has begun to carry her inside him. Her words have become asterisk resident, asterisk in his psyche. They live there, they speak through him. And when I listened to that patient quote her 7 times in 20 minutes while insisting he felt nothing, I was not listening to a man in denial. I was listening to a man in possession. But the most surprising part is yet to come. For the deeper question is not why he quotes her, but who exactly he is quoting. Here we enter the territory of what I have called the asterisk anima asterisk, the feminine figure who lives in the unconscious of every man, the inner woman who is the bridge between the ego and the deepest layers of the soul. When a man falls in love, he does not, in the first instance, fall in love with the woman in front of him. He falls in love with the projection of his anima upon her. He sees in her face a face he has carried, unknowingly, since the depths of the collective unconscious itself. And the words she speaks become for him the words of this inner figure. He is not quoting her. He is quoting the goddess who has for a brief and fragile moment taken on her form. This is why a man who is fallen in love begins to find ordinary things she says profound. A remark about the weather, an offhand sentence about her childhood, these become utterances of strange significance. He turns them over in his thoughts the way a medieval alchemist turned over the cryptic phrases of an old manuscript, searching for hidden gold. He does not know that the gold is not in her words. The gold is in the projection itself. Her voice has become the voice of the oracle. The second phrase belongs to the same family but cuts even deeper. It is the phrase a man uses when he begins to imagine her opinion on matters she has never been consulted about. Asterisk. I wonder what she would think of this. A man who has begun to silently consult an absent woman before forming his own judgments has installed her as an inner authority. He has elevated her in the unseen government of his psyche to the rank of advisor. And no man does this for someone he is indifferent to. So when a man catches himself walking home alone in the evening, wondering what she would say about something, he has already crossed a threshold he did not see. What Jung said about this is deeply unsettling, and I will say it again in my own voice. The figures who live in our inner conversations are the figures who have power over our souls. The mind is not a private chamber. It is a populated landscape. And when a new figure takes up residence there, when her voice joins a chorus of inner voices that shape our decisions, she has become, in the most literal sense, a part of him. He carries her now. And the carrying is the love, even when the conscious mind has not yet learned its name. The third phrase is more subtle still, and it is the one men deny most strenuously. It is the phrase a man uses when he begins to explain her to himself. Asterisk. She probably had a hard day. She didn't mean it that way. She's just like that when she's stressed. Asterisk. When a man begins to offer interpretations of a woman's behavior, interpretations she has not asked for, interpretations he constructs in solitude, he has begun the strange and almost sacred work of understanding her. And understanding in the depth psychological sense is never neutral. To understand someone is to take them into oneself, to make a model of them in the inner world. The man who explains a woman to himself when she is not there has already begun to dream her, and the dreaming is the beginning of everything. The detail most people overlook hides precisely here. We assume that men first feel love and then begin to think about the beloved, but the order is more often than not reversed. The thinking comes first. The constructing of an inner model comes first. The man begins to carry a small simulation of her in his mind, a simulation he tests, refines, defends, returns to when he is alone. And only later does the conscious feeling we call love rise up and announce itself. By the time the feeling arrives, the unconscious has been at work for weeks, building the inner woman whose shape happens to resemble the outer one. The feeling is the latecomer. The construction is the lover. The fourth phrase is the one I find most beautiful and most tragic. It is the phrase a man uses when he begins to soften his own opinions in her presence, not out of fear, not out of strategy, but out of something deeper. He begins to leave room for her. Asterisk, well, that's one way of looking at it. I see what you mean. You might be right about that. A man who has, in every other context, defended his opinions with the stubborn pride of a soldier defending his last position, begins suddenly to discover that he can hold his views more loosely when she is in the room. The ego, which is normally a fortress, has lowered its drawbridge, and it has lowered it for a reason the ego itself does not understand. It has lowered it because something deeper than the ego, what I have called the asterisk, self-asterisk, has recognized her as someone who matters to the soul's larger journey. This is the great secret that no man learns from books. The ego does not fall in love. The ego, in fact, resists love because love requires a softening that the ego experiences as a kind of death. The one who falls in love is the deeper figure within him, the self, who is always seeking wholeness, always seeking the encounter that will catalyze the great inner work I have called individuation. The self recognizes her before the ego does. And the first signs of this recognition are not in what the man feels, they are in what he says, and in the strange new flexibility of his words. There is an old idea in alchemy, that strange and beautiful science the medievals practiced, which was never really about turning lead into gold, but about turning the leaden soul into a golden one. The great work begins with what was called the the blackening. The first stage of transformation is not light but darkness. The matter must dissolve before it can be reborn. And love, true love, follows the same ancient pattern. It does not announce itself with light. It announces itself with a strange and disquieting dissolution of the man's familiar inner world. His speech changes. His thoughts return without his permission to the same face. His sleep is disturbed by dreams he cannot quite remember. He has entered the asterisk nigrido asterisk of the heart, and he does not yet know it. Here begins the darkest game of the unconscious. For the man who is in this stage will often experience his own state as confusion, as restlessness, even as suffering. He will say to himself and to his friends that he is unsettled, that he is not himself. He does not realize that this asterisk, not being himself asterisk, is precisely the point. The old self, the pre-love self, is being dissolved. A new self is being prepared. And the words that come out of his mouth in this period, the quotations of her, the consultations of her opinion, the explanations of her behavior, the new softness in his arguments, these are not signs of weakness. They are signs of metamorphosis. He is undergoing what the alchemists call the asterisk solutio asterisk, the dissolution of the old solid form so that the new form can take shape. I remember a young man, a student of philosophy, who came to me convinced that he was suffering from some form of nervous illness. He could not concentrate. His work had begun to slip. He felt, he said, as though his mind no longer belonged to him. I asked him what occupied his thoughts when he tried to study. He grew embarrassed. He said it was nothing, just images, just memories of conversations. I asked him whose conversations, and the moment I asked, his face changed, and he understood. He had been speaking to me for 40 minutes about a woman whose name he had not yet mentioned, but whose existence had been the silent architecture of his every sentence. He did not have a nervous illness. He had a woman in his soul. What mythology has been trying to tell us for centuries, in story after story across every culture, is that the meeting between a man and the feminine principle is the central drama of the human soul. Orpheus descends into the underworld for Eurydice, and his descent is the descent of every man into the unconscious. Dante is led through paradise by Beatrice, and Beatrice is the anima made visible, the inner feminine who alone can guide the masculine soul to its highest realization. The knights of the Grail legends ride out in search of a vessel that, in its deepest meaning, is the feminine principle of receptivity and wholeness. These stories are not entertainments. They are maps. They are showing us what is happening to a man when his words begin to be inhabited by a woman's voice. And the great error of modern man, who has lost his gods but not his need for them, is to take these inner events and treat them as merely outer ones. He believes that he is falling in love with asterisk, her asterisk, the particular woman in front of him, the woman with this name and this face. He does not see that he is also, and perhaps primarily encountering the great archetype of the feminine that has been slumbering in his depths since the day of his birth. The outer woman is the occasion. The inner woman is the event. And when his speech begins to change, it is the inner woman who is speaking through him, using the outer woman's words as her vehicle. This is why love is so often described in poetry and in religion as a kind of madness. It is not madness in the clinical sense. It is the madness of the ego encountering something larger than itself. The ego, accustomed to being the master of its own house, suddenly discovers that there is another presence in the house. A presence it did not invite, a presence it cannot evict, a presence that speaks through its mouth and dreams through its sleep. The man feels himself to be possessed because, in a sense, he is possessed. He has been visited by the anima, and the words he speaks in this state are not entirely his own. They are the words of the visitation. The real turning point begins right here. For the man who recognizes what is happening to him, who sees that his quoting of her, his consulting of her, his explaining of her, his softening before her are not random behaviors, but the visible signs of an invisible transformation, this man stands at a great threshold. He can refuse the encounter. He can retreat into the safety of his old self. He can defend his ego with the familiar weapons of rationalization and denial. Many men do. They preserve the fortress at the cost of the gold being prepared inside it. Or he can accept the dissolution. He can allow the asterisk, negrido asterisk, to do its work. He can let his speech change. He can let his sentences carry her. He can let his inner authorities reshuffle themselves and admit her into their council. He can let the old self die so that a new self can be born. This is what the alchemists call the asterisk, albedo asterisk, the whitening, the second stage of the work. The moment when out of the dissolved darkness a new and luminous form begins to emerge. And the man who passes through the albedo is no longer the man he was. He has been changed by the encounter with the feminine, and the change is irreversible, and the change is what his soul came into this life to undergo. But I must say something now that complicates this picture, because the truth of the soul is never simple. The fact that a man's speech betrays his love does not mean that the love is, in every case, what the man should follow into the outer world. Sometimes the outer woman is not the right vessel for the inner transformation. The anima projection can fall upon any woman the unconscious chooses, and it does not always choose wisely from the perspective of the outer life. The recognition of the projection is not the same as the command to act upon it. This is where the work of the soul becomes most difficult and most adult. The man who has learned to read his own speech, who has caught himself quoting her, consulting her, explaining her, softening before her, this man must then ask a second and harder question. What is the inner woman trying to teach me through this outer one? What aspect of my own soul is she carrying for me that I have not yet learned to carry for myself? Is this an encounter I am called to live out in the world, or to live out in the inner sanctuary, taking back the projection and integrating what it shows me? These are questions that no oracle can answer for him. He must descend into himself and find the answers in the dark. There is another phrase I should mention before we move on, because it is perhaps the most revealing of all, and the one men recognize last. It is the phrase a man uses when he begins to defend her in conversations with others. Someone makes an offhand remark, and the man feels a small unexpected heat rise in him, and he hears himself correcting the remark, gently insisting on a more accurate picture. He is not, in that moment, defending a woman he barely knows. He is defending the inner figure who has begun to live in him. He is defending his own soul secret. For a man defends what he loves, and the heart knows this even when the head does not. I want to turn now to the question of why this is so difficult for modern man to see. We live in an age that has lost almost all of its inherited symbols. Our ancestors had marriage rituals, courtship customs, mythologies of love. They had a symbolic language through which the great inner events could be recognized and named. A man in the medieval world who began to quote a woman, to consult her invisible opinion, to defend her in her absence, would have had at his disposal an entire tradition of poetry and chivalric romance that would have whispered to him, asterisk, you are entering the realm of courtly love. You are crossing the threshold of the great inner pilgrimage, asterisk. Modern man has no such whisper. He has only his confusion. And the unnameable, in psychology as in life, is the most dangerous of all things. This is why so many men today suffer love as a kind of catastrophe. They have no inner framework for understanding what is happening to them. They feel themselves changing without knowing what they are changing into. They hear their own voices speaking new sentences without recognizing whose voice it is. And in the absence of a symbolic language, they reach for the language nearest at hand, the cheap therapeutic platitudes that have replaced the old religions. They are told they are asterisk codependent asterisk, or asterisk attached asterisk, or asterisk infatuated asterisk. And these words, half true and half empty, do nothing to honor the depth of what is occurring. The man is undergoing a metamorphosis as ancient as the species, and we have given him only the vocabulary of a magazine article to describe it. What he needs is the older language, the language of the soul, the language that knows that the feminine principle is real, that the anima is real, that the inner woman whose voice begins to inhabit his speech is real, even though she is not material in the way a chair or a stone is material. She is real in the way that dreams are real, in the way that meanings are real, in the way that the gods of ancient religions were real to the people who served them. She is real as a force in the soul. And until a man can recognize this, his own speech will remain to him a mystery. The old Greeks, who understood these matters far better than we do, said that Eros was a god, not a feeling. A god? A being with his own will, his own purposes. A being who chose his moments, with a cosmic logic no mortal could fully comprehend. When a Greek man fell in love, he understood himself to have been visited by a deity. He did not say, I have a strong feeling, He said, Eros has struck me, And this distinction is not a matter of mere superstition. It is a matter of psychological accuracy. The man who hears himself quote a woman he claims not to care about has been struck by Eros. He may not know it, he may deny it, but the god is in him. And the small phrases that escape his lips are the small announcements of the God's presence. To recognize this is not to surrender to madness. It is, paradoxically, to begin the path towards sanity. For only the man who can name what is happening to him can choose, with any real freedom, what to do about it. The man who does not see the God in his speech is the man most fully ruled by the God. The man who sees the God and bows to him with both reverence and discernment is the man who begins to walk the path of individuation. I want to close with a thought I have been circling around all night, and which I want now to state directly. The phrase at the center of our reflection, when a man says this, he is already in love, is in the end not really about romantic love at all. Or rather, it is about romantic love only as a special case of something much larger. What we have been speaking of is the principle that speech reveals the soul, The words a man speaks, especially the small words, the words he does not notice himself speaking, are the most reliable map of his inner condition that exists. He cannot hide from his own speech. His speech is the place where the unconscious surfaces, where the buried gods of his inner world come up to breathe. The alchemist said that the prima materia the first matter of the great transformation, is everywhere, and that the reason most people never find it is that they expect it to be exotic. They look for it in distant places and in rare substances, when in fact it lies in the most ordinary materials, the things they handle every day and never see. The same is true of the soul's transformation. The first matter of love, the first matter of individuation, it is not in some far-off mystical experience. It is in your speech. It is in the sentence you just spoke without noticing. It is in the name that just slipped out of your mouth when you thought you were talking about something else. When was the last time you truly listened, to the words that came out of you when you were not paying attention? When was the last time you noticed whose name you have been quoting, whose opinion you have been silently consulting, whose face has been hidden in the architecture of your ordinary sentences? Somewhere in your speech the soul has already spoken. Somewhere in your speech the God has already announced his arrival. The only question that remains is whether you will hear what you have already been saying. And if you do hear it, if you catch yourself one ordinary afternoon in the middle of a sentence that betrays the secret your conscious mind has been keeping from you, then know that you stand where every man has stood at the great threshold. You stand where Orpheus stood at the mouth of the underworld. You stand where Dante stood at the edge of the dark wood. You stand where every soul stands when the inner woman first makes herself known. The work that begins here is the only work that finally matters, and it begins, as it has always begun, with a single phrase spoken without thinking, and with a silence in which one finally hears it. So I leave you tonight with no conclusion, because there is none. There is only the listening. There is only the slow, patient attention to your own speech and the willingness to be surprised by what you find there. Speak less and listen more, especially to yourself. And when you catch yourself, as you will, saying the small phrase that gives you away, do not be afraid of it, do not deny it, stay with it. Let it tell you what it has come to tell you. For the soul does not announce itself in grand visions, it announces itself in the smallest words. The next time you hear yourself quoting her, ask yourself who exactly is doing the quoting.